Thank you very much, Kevin, for that introduction. And let me start by extending my personal note of thanks to Nancy for her leadership on this issue, our wonderful advisory panel, and Eleanor, the principal author of this white paper. We're going to give you the highlights of the white paper. The white paper attempts to synthesize all of the research that is part of this study. And as you have heard, we hope that this is going to just be the beginning of a lot of dialogue about this issue. So let me just provide you with a little bit more context as to how we got here. Under Nancy's leadership, we started this in early 2013. Before we could even begin to talk about solutions, we needed to better understand the problem. And so that's why we convened the advisory panel, which has just served as an amazing resource for us in helping us to identify the hypothesis, guide our research, help us with recommendations, and then in the final synthesis of the white paper. As I'm sure you can tell, research is the foundation for this. Everything is based in the research. You heard about the study that Peter did. He just presented it. That was the flagship part of our study, but we also commissioned some additional research projects that are reflected in the white paper. We commissioned the IT group, which many of you may know is a leading aggregator of data on the advisor industry, to look at the differences between men and women advisors on a broad range of factors. We also wanted to collect more data on a very important question. Do women clients prefer women advisors? Do men clients prefer men advisors? There's a lot of misleading data out there, and we wanted to, we really wanted to tackle this question, and so we actually included some questions on gender preference in the 2014 Economics of Loyalty survey that was conducted by Advisor Impact, and that's an annual survey that focuses on clients of advisors. So as we began to frame the issue for further exploration, the central question, and Peter really noted it in his presentation, the stark difference between the impressions of CFP professional women and those who are outside of the CFP professional community. And Peter mentioned some of this data. 72% of women with CFP certification highly satisfied. In contrast, 46% of women without CFP certification were satisfied with their career. So there's a fundamental question to our research, which is why? Why is a profession that engenders so much career satisfaction, and based upon all of the women we talked to, women believe is so well suited for women, not attracting more women? So to tackle this question, we met with the advisory group, and based upon the research, the qualitative research, developed a series of hypotheses. And we identified those factors that we think might be keeping women from entering the career or getting them off track once they enter the career. And I think, as Peter mentioned, we called this concept chutes and ladders. So the chutes are the things that are either keeping women from entering or are getting them off track. In part 2 of our white paper, we look at these hypotheses with the research and come out with our findings. And in part 3, we talk about the ladders that we would recommend for encouraging and getting more women into the profession. And so what you see on the screen is also page 10 of your white paper. These are the hypotheses that we explored. So first, inadequate understanding of what financial planning is. I think you heard that from Peter's presentation. What does it take to be a successful financial planner? We were concerned that the business models and compensation models out there are a barrier for women, and so we wanted to explore that further. We wanted to explore the role of gender bias, that concept that our employers and our firms are creating an atmosphere that is unfriendly to women. We wanted to look at the work-life balance. Is that an incentive? Many women think it is an incentive, or is it a disincentive to selecting a career in financial planning? And finally, we wanted to explore the impact of the lack of women CFP professionals out there. At 23%, you have very few role models, you have very few networking opportunities, you cannot see the face of successful CFP professionals. What's the impact of that? So at this point in time, I will turn the presentation over to Eleanor, who will start to walk you through our findings, and then we'll talk about the recommendations for.
And I will need the clicker.
There you go.
Well, first of all, thank you, Marilyn. And I also want to thank the WIN Advisory Panel for the opportunity to be an integral part of the WIN initiative from the very beginning. You know, as a woman CFP professional for more than 2 decades, 2+ decades, I'll say, I'm one of the survivors and thrivers that we talk about in the white paper. And, you know, I have to say, I've loved being a financial planner, and I've loved the ability to combine my background. As was shared, I'm an English major in one life. I then had to get practical, so I went to the University of Chicago to get my MBA. And this career has offered me the perfect intersection between communicating ideas and, you know, understanding, I mean, it's offered me everything with that kind of, let's say, checkered past. But, you know, I have to admit, I'm sometimes lonely in this profession. Not today. I see so many women out there today, and it is just phenomenal. And I know getting to the ladies' room was tough. A good friend of Mary Beth and I went we had to go 2 floors up, but you know, we're used to climbing ladders, so there you go. But so maybe having more, not the hairdressers or hair dryers in the bathrooms, but maybe more bathrooms would help us all. But you know, I am passionate about opening doors to other women in this profession to share the experience I've had. So let's get to our findings. Our first finding is not from the Fundulis flagship research, but this, in fact, was from the ITAE study. And what we wanted to ask, we took the ITAE data, and as many of you know, that they do a tremendous job of looking at our profession and industry and giving us all sorts of numbers about it. And we went and we asked them, can we now look at that data segmented by gender? What does the financial advisor look like? And you'll see from these results that she does stand out in a number of key ways. She is not just blended into the woodwork in our industry. She is different in a number of key ways, and that these themes will carry forward in some more of our findings. First of all, and perhaps most distressingly, she is paid less. Our data did discover a gender gap, and that was keeping constant years of experience, her revenue production in the financial planning in the financial advisory profession. Let me just make that one clarification. The ITAE data is looking at financial advisors. We also looked at CFPs within that data, but the number was a bit too small to make significant distinctions. So we're looking at the woman financial advisor relative to her peers. This would be RIAs and registered reps. So she is paid less. Even when we hold constant experience, her revenue production, as well as her ownership status. And the gap has been estimated, the regression studies show us a $32,000 annual gap between what she is paid and a similarly located or situated man in the industry is paid. That would educate a child or two, right? She's more likely to be paid a salary, and we found that 32% of women were salaried versus 13% of men. And this also tells its own story. She is younger. Someone, I believe Tom may have quoted the statistic about 56-year-old, that's the average age in this industry. Well, women are on the younger side within the industry. Approximately half of women surveyed were age 40 or younger compared to 1/3 of men. So we're bringing a younger outlook into this profession, but also correspondingly, we have less experience in the profession. 44% of women had 8 or fewer years of experience compared to 29% of men. She is more likely to work for a bank. 21% of women were employed by a bank compared with 10% of men. And sort of in the same theme, in the same, general category, she's also more likely to be part of a large practice team. 27% of women practiced in large firms versus 18% of men. So I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions, but there is obviously, she is more attracted to perhaps a larger, more established entity within the profession. And finally, she's not as likely to own her practice. 39% of women owned all or part of their practice versus 63% of men. So yes, we do look different in the financial advisory profession. Okay, now another finding, and Marilyn mentioned that we worked with Advisor Impact. Many of you know this organization. They run an annual economics of loyalty study to look at the drivers of client engagement. And this was our one, we contacted Julie Littlefield, who's the president of Advisor Impact, because this was the one way we could tap into the clients of financial planners and get at least their perspective on a couple of questions. What we really wanted to ask is, is there a business case for having more women CFP professionals? Because certainly if we can create that business case, this whole job is going to be a heck of a lot easier. So I wanted to go over what we found both in doing some background research, but also in participating in the economics of loyalty study, where we were permitted to ask 5 questions that had to do with clients' preference for the gender of their advisor. But before I begin, first of all, I want to put in context a statistic that has had huge currency lately in the last year or so, and that is this 70% number. I don't know how many of you have heard of that number, but it is said that 70% of women prefer a female advisor. And I see it quoted in various articles, and sadly, it's not the whole truth. It is a truth, but not the whole truth. That number really needs the context. First of all, we have to, the question is, how many women have a gender preference? And it actually is a much smaller number. It's probably in the, under 20% or even in the teens. Once we've narrowed the field to those with a gender preference, yes, 70% of that smaller field do have a preference for a woman advisor. So it's very important, you know. I was hoping it was 70% of all women, and I was ready to distribute leaflets in New York or whatever I needed, because it would be a great, great story. But alas, it's not quite the truth. There was a study done by the Family Wealth Council a couple of years ago where they looked at women of wealth. They asked the same question, and again, the baseline in terms of gender preference is not there. Again, it's in the, you know, teens of women who prefer the gender of their advisor or who prefer women. They did, however, find an above baseline preference for women among these women clients, among divorcees. Surprise, surprise. They might be happy not to work with a man or the attorney or whatever at that point. They have a slight preference for women as well as widows, interestingly enough. So there is that preference at the margin. In the work that we did for the WIN initiative, with the questions that we submitted to the Economics of Loyalty study, we found that only 11% of clients, and this was both men and women, we weren't just looking at women, have a gender preference. And it could be for men or women. So we were not seeing anything robust in that department. Now, at the same time in that study, it is true that men are more likely to work with men at the margin and women more likely to work with women. So as things stand now, we can't make the case simply on client preference. I have to tell you, though, of all my years of practice and hanging out with the likes of you guys and gals, excuse me, and talking to lots of clients and lots of consumers, the anecdotes, the idea that women would prefer women, that is a hugely popular idea. You know, and I wish I had a tax-free dollar for every time a woman has come up to me and said, I want to work with a woman. So while we don't have the data yet, I have this conviction that as more women come into the profession, we may see more of a preference emerge. You know, I mean, fortunately, our profession is generally well-liked. People are happy with who they're with, which is now, you know, largely 80, 78 or whatever percent men. But I think as more women come in, we may begin to see more women who say, thank God, I have somebody to talk to. So I think what we have to turn to, and I think that our keynote speaker today is going to be talking a little bit about this. We know from the public sector, from firms, firms who are publicly traded, that are visible, we can look at their return numbers, that there is, in fact, a very strong case emerging for having more female leadership, both on boards as well as management teams. And on their return numbers, return on sales, return on investment, we're seeing higher numbers among firms that have higher ratios of women involved. So the business case is emerging. Stay tuned. I think we're going to help write that business case. Okay, so now we're going to go to some of the findings that are reported in the WIN paper, and in many cases these are distillations or highlighting of what Peter has already commented on. In a way, it's sort of like, New York, New York. So good you name it twice. Well, I'm going to name these findings twice because they're really important. First of all, we have talked about this knowledge gap that exists between women and men. And women simply, all else equal, and I'm thinking women, I'm thinking girls, I'm thinking young high school students, they simply do not know about financial planning, certainly not the CFP certification process. They don't know about it as a viable, real career. I will never forget going to my daughter's career day as a financial planner, and I stood in front of those 6th graders, and I unfortunately followed a father who came to the same program, and he happened to be a mounted policeman. And those kids just loved him. I mean, he had, he was packing the heat or whatever. Then I get up, and one boy in the back of the room looks me square in the eye and says, "What kind of car do you drive?" And I said, I was honest, I'm ethical and transparent. And I said, a Honda. Well, I lost the room right there. If I'd had a horse, it would have been better. But they don't know about financial planning. Women do not know. And this is, as Peter reported, that is not true of men outside the profession. They're far more familiar. That knowledge gap is even greater among women and men students in finance-related programs. They don't know about financial planning as a true practice, as a true career. And guess what? You don't know, you don't go. You don't know about the profession, you don't go into it. It seems so obvious, but that is profound, and it has very profound implications for our solutions. Those women out, and I'm saying outside the profession, sort of in the next circle, as it were, what they do think they know about financial planning is often doesn't mesh with what we on the inside as CFP professionals know, and we also talked about that. And just to reiterate, CFP professionals are much more apt to describe what we do in terms of the communication, that we offer the holistic advice, whereas women outside are much more likely to focus on the numbers, product sales, financial markets. And in fact, back to the ITE study, it was also found in that study that one benefit of the CFP certification, it changed the way these CFP professionals talked about investments and the markets. And you can imagine in what kinds of ways that might be. Women outside the professional, as Peter mentioned, they're not as likely to perceive true professional advantage in terms of what they know and in terms of their own confidence. That was just so remarkable talking to students, particularly young women students, who said, with that CFP, I now can talk to clients, and I can talk to clients older than myself. It was the important confidence boost that they needed. Whereas we heard from a woman non-CFP professional, probably helps on paper. One of them said, maybe it's like the school that you go to. It looks good on paper, but does it really do anything for you? I don't know. And that is that knowledge gap. She didn't know what it could in fact do. So clearly, the result, what we're saying is that the inside story is not being communicated to the outside. Again, very basic finding, but very powerful in its implications. Next finding, and this also was important, and there are a lot of reasons and a lot of different agents or people responsible for some of the shoots that are pulling women off the path. But women themselves, there may be behaviors on the part of women that are holding them back. They're leaning out, they're not leaning in. Now, the two that we highlight in the white paper findings are, number one, that lack of, let me move on, there we go. Lack of initiative and risk aversion. Now, in some cases, you might think those are really sort of, two sides of the same coin. But the reason we separate them is because women do not see them as the same thing. Women, and particularly CFP women, they'll own up to the lack of initiative. That they're not, women are not speaking up for themselves. But on the risk aversion side, no. Men are more apt to attribute risk aversion to us than women are themselves. Now, the risk aversion, we have, that may take many, many forms, but we know in particular, as was already discussed, there is the risk of a variable performance-based compensation. And by that I mean, and I'm not talking, fee commission kind of thing, I'm also talking about when you get paid what you do. So it might be AUM, it may be transactions, it's not based on more intangibles like client satisfaction. For many women, and there's a quote that we share in the white paper, we received a lot of mail and phone calls of women sharing their experience, and a lot of them said, I gotta start somewhere, I have 2 kids, I've got to have a base salary. So call that risk aversion, call that just sensible planning, whatever, but there it is. There are problems, I think, that the compensation models, business models may deter women. We also find, now Peter called it double standard, we're gonna call it bias and discrimination. It does indeed exist within the financial planning profession, as it does in financial services in general. And the most egregious example is one that you've already seen, and that is when firms say, this is from that sector, that respondent segment in the survey, said, yes, we'll hire men over women, far more often than women. 6 times more likely to say that men make better financial planners than women. Now, I should say about half of that group were even-handed about it, but those that were not, it was much more heavily dominated towards men. But then when these same, this segment was asked about qualifications, do you agree that women have this qualification? Do you agree with men having this qualification? You can see by the numbers there that women were given the edge on these. We have 5 characteristics here, but in fact there were more in the study, and in all cases of positive attributes of financial planning, women were given the edge. What doesn't balance here? Something is not right, and we're calling it bias, which in fact firms quite frankly own up to. There's no dispute, however, among men and women that women are made to feel less welcome in the financial planning profession. And there's only a very, very small number of respondents, of women, in the case of women respondents, who believe that women are also made to feel welcome. I fortunately am one of those. I had a male mentor who paved the way for me, but this is the problem. I was lucky. But there are a lot of people who are not feeling the welcome that I certainly did early in my career. Finally, this is not quite our last finding, but women believe, this was really interesting to me. In the focus groups and even in the quantitative survey, women really believe that this is a profession, that they can balance their work and their lives. And it wasn't necessarily balance families. One woman at Boston University said, I like to hike. I like to, I want my me time. I want to be able to go out and walk during the day. And they really see financial planning as offering them that flexibility and ability. And I had a number of mothers speak up and said, I would leave. I went to the soccer game, whatever it was, they felt that it was here. The problem was that employers obviously feel otherwise. And when asked about, are women more likely to leave because of a family versus men, they're much more apt to believe that women are going to be the ones to cut and run when family comes along. And as we all now know, work life is a gender equal opportunity kind of issue for both men and women, and I think particularly for younger generations. So that bias, that unbalance, that double bind, I believe it's called, exists in our profession. Then finally, and there was no real dispute about this, there's general agreement that professional support for women is lacking. Now, in a way, this is one of these vicious cycles. We don't have enough women, so guess what? We don't have enough role models, we don't have enough mentors, which means we don't have enough women. So clearly, this is a vicious cycle that needs to be dispelled. I will say when we looked at CFP certificate data as well as part of our study, another key and significant difference between women and men CFPs is that women are less likely to go on and practice as a financial planner. And those numbers are more like 20%. So we drop from that 23% certificates down to 20%. So again, financial planning is about working with clients and all of that. And we have a little bit of leakage too, that women are not going on to do what they are trained to do. They may teach, not that that's a great thing, but they're not practicing financial planning in the same numbers. So there is that lack of support. Now, one final interesting thing is that when we talked about corporate training programs in the quantitative research, men think they're fine. They're adequate at teaching women. Women, however, no. It's not adequate. And so we have we have some ideas, and our advisory panel were great in saying, what does that support? What does that teaching, that professional development, what does that need to look like? And in many cases, it needs to focus on how do you trace that path in a big firm? How do you trace that path in a small firm, in this business model, in that business model? What is it going to look like? We don't have the cultural heritage, the experience in the marketplace to just, have this in our DNA yet. So we need these networks. So with that, we'll now get to the best part of all, the solutions.
So what do we do with all of this? I'm going to just highlight a few things that are in the white paper. We start with the recommendations on page 33. We divide them into a number of categories. What can we do to attract more women into the profession? And then what can we do to make it more attractive to women as they begin to enter, or to help them thrive and succeed? What you see on the screen is just a few of a number of recommendations that are in the white paper. But it must be clear to you right now, after all of the data, we need to correct the misperception about financial planning, that financial planning is a holistic profession that focuses on communication and relationship, not just on math and technical skills. We need to start much, much earlier in the education process. We have ideas for even starting at the grade school level, but at the high school level and the college level, build in to the career counselors and the education that financial planning is a specific career path within the area of financial services and why it is so attractive to women. And then we need to make sure that we have the faces of successful CFP professional women in front of women starting at the very youngest ages and then through that high school and college experience. Then what can we do to make the profession more attractive once women are there? First, I think we need to start by recognizing those firms that are making major strides and initiatives in this area, and to our sponsors, TD and Ameriprise, for your leadership in this area. Clearly, you're devoting significant resources, human talent and financial, to supporting women in the profession. So we need to look at firms and emulate what they're doing. We have a number of ideas. Top management in firms need to embrace the notion that they need to set diversity goals and gender goals to reduce the gender parity in the area of financial planning. A very difficult issue and a very challenging issue for firms is the issue of the pay disparity. Our white paper calls for adopting transparent compensation structures and set responsibilities to reduce the disparity in pay and responsibility. Another thing we need to do to make the profession more attractive, and again, this is at the firm's level, but offer alternative forms of compensation, particularly for those who are just entering the profession, so that they can learn the ropes without having the pressure to produce. And then also, I think that everyone can do this, but within firms and also individuals, create and sponsor and support networks of women who can support each other. So we at CFP Board are taking this research very seriously and this initiative very seriously. And I would like to acknowledge both Ray and Kevin, the leadership. When we say that the leadership starts at the top, the leadership starts at the top here for the support for this initiative. And we believe we can't do this alone, but we are committed to increasing the number of CFP professional women. And we have identified a number of initiatives that we will commit to doing. And we are hopeful that this can be, that we can convene groups of people who have a responsibility in this area. We can provide some leadership and hopefully catalyze action in this area. So some of the things that we will undertake. We are going to do an internal review of our processes and procedures to make sure that they're aligned with our WIN values. We're going to set up an advisory council, and this council, we will look to this council to help hold us to these commitments and to pursue our initiatives. We're going to create the faces of women CFP professionals. We envision this as a video and with complementary print that we can make available at career fairs in high schools and colleges throughout the country. We'd like to partner with 4 or 5 firms to start out with, pilot projects, and hopefully firms that have diverse compensation models and create WIN initiatives within those firms. So we invite all firms who are present in the room to volunteer to join us in that effort. And we are also going to create WIN advocates. We envision putting together the learnings and the messages that we're communicating today in a box, if you will, and have our WIN advocates take this message out to all of throughout the country. We have CFP Board ambassadors who do much of this with our messages at CFP Board. We want to create the same thing for WIN. So if you're speaking at groups in your local community, in your firms, in schools, in your alma mater, wherever, but take the WIN message out to do exactly what Eleanor and Peter were talking about. If you don't know, you can't. If you don't know about it, you can't consider this profession as one of the options. So those are some of the things that we're going to be doing. We also, in the WIN white paper, have suggested some things that you all can do. These are really specific, focused things that you can do, and we gave you a helpful code. So there are a lot of groups involved, and we indicated those that we think are good for men and women. Those are good for firms. Those are good for membership organizations. Those are good for educators. So find the one that works for you and join us. Let us know what you will commit to. But certainly volunteering in any one of the areas that CFP Board is going to be initiating, either on our council or be a WIN advocate or volunteer to be a face in our FACES project, be a mentor or organize mentorship programs. I said the firms present take part in our pilot projects and also make sure that you include specific development programs for women in your conferences and in your meetings. And then finally, any additional financial support would be more than welcome. This is going to cost money. We're committed to doing it. The bottom line is, as one of our panelists said, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It requires a long-term commitment, and we're in it for the long term. So right for now, I'll turn it over to Kevin, and we'll entertain some additional questions.
Great. Thank you, both Marilyn. So we have Eddie and John here to help. And are we doing, we'll have Marilyn, Peter Fondulis, if you'll come up. Nancy, if you would come up as well. We have time for about 10 minutes of questions. So just raise your hand if you have a question. Right here in the middle section. I don't know whether John is.
Hi. I noticed in your data the 70% where women would be, or when it came back down to a smaller percentage where women would have a proclivity to have a woman advisor. Did you look as well as whether men would prefer women advisors? Because if this is a holistic profession, we should be engaging both women and men clients.
Peter, do you want to?
Oh, no, I think that would pertain to the economics of loyalty. I'm sorry.
Hang on 1 second. For our sound guy, Josh, back there.
Does that work? No, there's going to be a button. I have the same problem with TV remotes. My children say, "What's wrong with you?" It's called age. Can you hear me now? Okay. We did have a question in there because I have heard, and many of you may have experienced this, that oftentimes men, and I've had men clients come to me for the same reason. They're coupled, they're in a, they're married or whatever, and they come thinking that I'm their sort of estate plan. So in other words, they want to get their wife ready for when and if they pass away, and they often believe that the wife will be happier with a female advisor. So that was the one instance that I'm aware of where men sometimes say, I'd rather, create a relationship now with a female advisor. We tested that. There was no real significant data to back that up. But it's a great question.
Thank you. Next question. You want to put this on here now?
Does everyone, I'm sorry.
Is do we have all the mics on here? If we could, thank you. Next question that we have. Right back here, Eddie. It is on.
So a lot of the research and the solutions focuses on getting women who are not aware of financial planning into financial planning. It would seem that some of the low-hanging fruit was to take women who are in financial advisory careers more generally, who aren't CFPs, and reinforce the value of a CFP. And so I think that the anecdote that Eleanor spoke of a woman who said, what is really the value of the CFP? I don't know. Is there any information or data that we can share to say, here is the value? As a woman advisor, if you add on the CFP, you make X more money, you have more deeper relationships with your clients.
So Marilyn, if you will speak first about the research that we've done in the past, and then Nancy, if you might give some anecdotal feedback as well.
Sure, and thank you for that question. That is a great question, and you're absolutely right. So what we are focusing on that group of women, and Joe Maggiore, who is with us today, who is our Director of Business Development, is going around to firms and talking about the difference in terms of measurable data. CFP professional the contribution a CFP professional can make to a firm. Now, that is, both in favor of men and women. But I think you're absolutely right. The initial target really are people who are in the financial services area, but need sort of that extra motivation and incentive to make the investment necessary to get the education, pass the exam, and get the CFP certification. So
And I would just simply add, the research really rings true. Some of what we saw in the findings that Peter had put up around CFP professionals certainly having more satisfaction with what it is they do every day, going deeper in their relationships with clients to really understand the family dynamics before they advise around what would be recommended to help them with their overall wealth structure. You'll see a little bit around compensation, particularly that women I had at that kitchen cabinet dinner. There's no question that while it may have been difficult in the early years, the first couple years to kind of get going, as many of you have experienced, particularly those who are financial advisors, then they saw a huge run-up overall and over time in compensation, such that they were on par with men or even surpassed because they had the ability and the flexibility to do what they wanted. So it's different depending on what kind of work environment. For me personally, it's always been nothing but a positive, a door opener, because you differentiate yourself, because you do business differently. It's much more about, as I said, that interface and integration around family and wealth and how to make it work regardless of the family, the household income, and whatever the circumstances might be.
I also think, Nancy, the LEAD program where John Rogers, my counterpart at the CFA Institute, Nancy and the Bank of America folks, we were both there talking about the role of certification accreditations like the CFA or the CFP. Many of you here, if you're in a firm or in an organization that has the opportunity to reach out and share the value of CFP certification, I thought that was a particularly effective one where we had 150 or 200 women.
Absolutely.
Next question. Eddie, we have one over here, and then we'll come back over to you, John, next.
As a CFP, I understand that we all, the satisfaction we get from our job has to do with the relationships. But the truth is that to just do plain financial planning, the way most of us get paid is through assets under management. So I don't think that we can deny the fact that in order to actually make money in this career, you do need to know something about stocks and bonds and managing money. And we can't say it's only about relationships because otherwise you don't get paid. So how do we address that? Because while, as a seasoned CFP, I understand that's the most important part, but there is that part about how we actually make money and pay the bills.
Eleanor or Nancy?
I would just simply say that's absolutely correct. I mean, in anything you do, whether it's financial planning or any business, you have to position it for business use, so to speak. So there's always got to be that value proposition, and I agree. So if you're in a position where you're thinking, I don't want to be involved in sales and I don't want to deal with numbers, I just want to be a relationship builder, that's probably not going to do it. That's not going to be a value proposition for any business. But at the same time, really understanding how to position your mark and say, even though we're talking about managing the money, I'm not here to sell you on that. I'm in a position where I'm thinking through how are we going to have your goals align with what it is you have and what you need to do. The end game is up to you, the client, so to speak, as to what you feel you need to do in the way of managing your assets and so forth. In some business models, you might do the managing. In others, you might be outsourcing it. Either way works, because unless we take clients to the implementation phase of the financial planning process to where they take action, guess what? All the planning, you know this, you do, is not worth anything. So we've got to get to that stage, which is also the business driver for the value proposition. So thanks for bringing that up, Val.
John, last question, and then we're going to adjourn for lunch.
As we make that push to advance the designation and to create that awareness, there are indeed some companies that push back the designation because of the fiduciary responsibility associated with it. I'm in that situation right now, and that's a big concern to me. How do we address that?
So if you're a CFP professional, all CFP professionals, regardless of the business model that you work in, are obligated to follow our standards of professional conduct. And so we understand that from time to time there are issues, and what I would suggest is that you visit with Joe Majeri, because sometimes we find that the support at the top of the organization doesn't always carry down to out in the field. And Joe's in a position where he can make the calls back to the top of the organization and help to make sure that the wishes, because more and more firms on a regular basis are institutionalizing CFP certification, and it's not just the training and the exam, but it's the total package of the ethics as well. So if you would see Joe here when we break. So, well, that'll be the last question that we have before lunch. I want to thank Marilyn and Eleanor, Nancy, and all of you today. Thank you.